Replacement lampshades of all kinds in many fabrics and styles. Find your favorite at Exciting Lighting, the unique lighting specialty store. Exciting Lighting, 2 Indianapolis locations.
Thanks for making Wish TV Indiana's most watched television station.
Welcome to Top Story. I'm Ken Owen. Another week and more debate over something that affects all of us, taxes. After years of crossing legislative hurdles, horse racing will soon become a reality in Indiana. Anderson will be the site of Indiana's first pari-mutuel horse racing track. Developers plan to build an $11 million facility on the southeast side of Anderson. And later on Top Story, we'll have a report on how that horse track will impact the area's economy. But first, one of the big stories continues to be President Clinton's economic proposals. In fact, there are signs that President Clinton's proposals are reaching out to more sources of revenue. We have more from CBS's Susan Spencer.
American smokers may soon have one more reason to kick the habit. President Clinton hinted for the first time that he sees higher taxes on cigarettes and perhaps on alcohol and guns as fair game when it comes to paying for health care. Though insisting no decisions have been made, he conceded more money will have to be raised to provide universal health insurance. But why consider these so-called sin taxes, seen as hitting hardest at the middle class?
I think health-related taxes are different. I think cigarette taxes, for example, are different. Why? Because I think that we are spending a ton of money in private insurance and in government tax payments to deal with the health care problems occasioned by bad health habits, and particularly smoking, which is costing us a lot of money.
The president refused to rule out another idea to raise money, taxing some health benefits as income, more political dynamite. He spoke as a group of labor and business leaders, some of them ex-Bush supporters, endorsed his economic plan. And he had some well-chosen words for opponents.
I have a difficult time taking these people seriously who say we should have more spending cuts, who were here for the last 12 years. Where were they?
Raising all these other taxes and tax rates on corporations and small and low-income people, or small businesses and low-income people, clearly will weaken an already fragile economy.
And Republican senators promised to amend the president's plan by dropping the tax increases and his program to stimulate the economy.
This is basically a priority amendment which says we shouldn't raise income taxes, energy taxes, and Social Security taxes to fund new spending.
We promise a lively debate today on Top Story. We're joined by two men from both sides of the political aisle who will be jawing at each other and having some fun with this topic. Annie Jacobs, the Democratic Congressman, and Republican Congressman Dan Burton. Gentlemen, thank you for coming and joining us today on Top Story. Let's start by talking about the proposal now. It's been about a week and a half since Mr. Clinton unveiled this in his State of the Union speech. We use that term lightly because he didn't use it this year. Where does the proposal stand, and does it look like the plan's in trouble? Mr. Burton?
Well, I was just elected chairman of the Republican Study Committee, and we did research over the last weekend, an in-depth analysis of what we had so far. And I think that when the American people find out everything that's in it, it's going to have a tough sledding, like outside right now. There are 59 discretionary and 41 mandatory programs that are going to have fee increases that they're counting as spending cuts. And those are additional revenues that are taken out of people's pockets. That amounts to about $70 billion in addition to the $328 billion they're talking about in the form of tax increases. And when you look at the thing very closely, what we call smoke and mirrors, and Andy and I may have a difference on this, we find that over the 5-year period, instead of a cut in domestic spending, there's a $94 billion increase in domestic spending, and the only decrease in the deficit will come from tax increases and from $112 billion, $110 billion in defense cuts. So it's not really a burden sharing like he's talking about, and it's all going to come out of taxpayers' pockets primarily.
Mr. Jacobs?
Well, as Dan just said, there are going to be cuts. He says they're only defense cuts. I don't think that's quite accurate, but those are cuts. Some people think that God pays the bills at the Defense Department because it's usually holy crusades that we're sent off to around the world, straighten out other people's problems, letting ours go. I don't think there are enough cuts in the president's proposal. On the other hand, I think that it is generally agreed by objective sources, and scholars generally say that this proposal to make cuts is a departure from those we've seen over the last 15 or 20 years, really in both Democratic and Republican administrations, that there really is less smoke and mirrors. There's not enough cut, but there's a lot less fakery about it. As far as the fees are concerned, I don't know. I think the Reagan administration invented that it wasn't tax, it was fees. And I agree with Danny, if it quacks like a duck. Their theory, however, is that if the taxpayers are putting up a lot of money to take care of the people who have boats, for example, and have services from the government, that if those people start paying for part of those services themselves, the government spends less money taking care of those boats. So you can interpret it either way. For example, a lot of people in Congress are able to be against pork when the pork doesn't amount to much profit for contractors. But when it comes to the super collider down in Texas, ask Senator Graham what he thinks about that.
That's one of the things Mr. Clinton wants to cut spending to.
Well, he did want to until some of those guys talked him out of it. And when it comes to the space platform, oh, my goodness, the children of this country, how they'd suffer without it. But if you ask Carl Sagan or any scientist who's not on the payroll of a contractor in this country, they'll tell you it's a pork barrel boondoggle.
Well, Mr. Clinton said this week we need to vote on the spending cuts before we address the tax hikes. And Senator Dole, the Republican majority leader, came back and said the plan's in trouble. That's a sure sign that Mr. Clinton is fishing. Do you think that's the case?
Oh, I think the American people want to cut the size of government. We've had taxes that the tax revenues have gone from $500 billion to $1.1 trillion in the last 10 years, and yet we're still running $350 to $400 billion deficits. So I don't see the problem being that we don't have enough tax revenues. It's that we're spending too much. But I'd just like to respond to what Andy said. He is right that there are spending cuts. The spending cuts amount to $91.7 billion, but he's increasing domestic spending in other areas, $177.9 billion. So the net is that we're going to have about a $94 billion spending increase in domestic programs, and that is not indicative of a real commitment to cutting domestic spending. And we've got to do that if we're going to come to grips with this.
Figures don't lie, but sometimes they're
I'll be happy to
inaccurate.
give you a copy of this, Andy.
I'll be
I want
happy
you
to
to
give
take
you
it
a copy
with
of ours.
It's got a Republican letterhead on it, doesn't it?
It's the Republican Study Committee. It's our committee. We work very hard on it.
As I say, I think there are real net cuts, but I don't think they're large enough either. For example, the United States, I don't know if you've read this book out, this new paperback, the Waste in Government book, you know the one I mean, they passed around there. It astounds me, the number of Gulfstream jet airplanes around for big shots in the government to go out here, there, and yon. The amount of automobiles, luxury automobiles that the United States government owns, operates, and pays chauffeurs to drive, all that sort of thing is the sort of thing that really burns people.
Well, you two gentlemen have been in Congress for a long time. What is it going to take to change it? I mean, that's what we're talking about, is fundamental change, and it's been going on for a long time. What is it going to take to reverse that?
It's going to take a commitment to make the hard choices. The problem is, and he was talking about pork a while ago, we have people come to the floor on pork barrel projects, and I'm trying to cut them. He'll tell you about my amendments, and they'll come in and say, does it affect my state, or does it affect my area? And what we have to do is set priorities and say, is this a real priority for America? If it is, then let's spend the money for it. If it isn't, let's put it on the back burner down the road. Also in the area of entitlements, we don't want to hurt anybody who's getting an entitlement unduly, but what we need to do is stop the growth, the unnecessary growth in entitlements. I think entitlements ought to be frozen at a last year's spending level plus no more than a 1 or 2% growth rate. You couple that with defense cuts, cutting out the pork, give the president the line item veto, and you could be on a road to a balanced budget in a 5 or 6 or 7 year period without these massive tax increases. These tax increases, $327 billion in tax increases, are not the end of it. You heard that they're talking about an increase in taxes for health care, and that's going to be around another $90 billion. You take that kind of money out of the collective pockets of America, and you're going to put us in another recession, and in my view, it's going to cost hundreds of thousands of jobs.
Gentlemen, we're going to take a break. There's a lot more to talk about, including, would you want to be president? We'll talk some more on Top Story when we come back.
Early notice.
Give me a snowfall potential map. Here's that band of heaviest.
Expanded news breaks with live reports from all over the area.
We do believe he was taken to a hospital again in backed up traffic.
Early and frequent updates on school closings. Every station in town covered the store, but none went the extra mile like 24-hour News 8. Around the clock, on the scene. First with the information. 24-hour News 8 on today's Wish TV. It's the best news you'll get all day.
The tax man's coming. Prepare to pay. Quick, slash the price on this car. Prepare to pay. Quick, slash the price on this car, too. Prepare to pay. Slash the prices on all cars, new and used.
The more you want to know about cars, yes, the more you want to know about cars, the more you want to see Bob Gorman.
Taxes are coming up, so prices are coming down.
Welcome back to Top Story. I'm Ken Owen, joined by Congressman Dan Burton and Congressman Andy Jacobs. Gentlemen, the report that came out Friday morning shows the economy grew at 4.8% in the fourth quarter of 1992. That's the best showing in 5 years. Mr. Burton, I imagine you'd say those are George Bush's policies at work, and Mr. Jacobs, President Clinton gave it a real bump by getting elected.
Well, obviously, the president and his economic policies near the end of his term, I think, had a real positive impact on that. The problem is it came too late to help him in his bid for re-election, and I think the Clinton people probably will claim part of that. I don't know.
Well, I think you'd have to be pretty dumb to believe either one of them had much to do with it. This is people run their own businesses, and employees make their own decisions of where and how to work. And this great dynamic economy needs some traffic regulation so it doesn't run into itself and things like that. But I don't know. I guess the president would take credit if it didn't snow in Indianapolis last Friday. And if it did, well, then God did that. You can blame that on to God. So this business of credit and blame, I think, is really a waste of time. However, on this question of what you can do to cut out the foolish spending, it's my considered opinion that there can be no greater restraint on public expenditures than an ironclad requirement that they be matched by taxes, by which I mean no more borrowing. As long as the government can borrow or print the money, then it's going to say yes to every demand, and there are a lot of them out there from pressure groups to spend more. But if a member of Congress can say to the group, I'd like to spend that way, but my Constitution won't let me, or in the manner of the used car salesman, I'd like to give them away, but my wife won't let me, then you'll be on the threshold of success. The rest of it is political talk and rhetoric.
Well, he's talking about a balanced budget amendment. I think Andy and I have both co-sponsored those in the past. 49 states have it. It does put teeth into the process, and I think that he's absolutely correct. I will say one thing, though, about economic impacts by governmental action. Large tax increases historically have had a very debilitating impact on economic growth and on the economy. And I believe the kind of tax increases that the president is talking about, if they're passed, along with the other tax increases they're going to be talking about down the road, will most certainly have a very adverse impact on the economy, and I think cost us a lot of jobs.
Let's look. Let me inject a little reality into this. If you buy a Rolls Royce, your payments on that car are going to be too high for your family. But if you buy it, you're going to have to meet those payments because it's an obligation to do so. Somewhere along the line, there's been a disconnect between government spending and government taxes. And I want to give you a little bit of history. And you talk about figures, Danny. Let me give you a figure. In the first 4 years of Mr. Reagan's administration, he made spending requests to Congress that exceeded those of the 4 years of the Carter administration by $1 trillion in those 4 years. He also got a tax cut that costs the Treasury, that diminished the income by $750 billion in those first 3 years after the tax cut passed in '81. Now, what I'm getting at here is that there was some pontification. When I first went to Congress, the slogan was, vote for every appropriation and vote against every tax bill. And somehow or another, the Hollywood writers were able to turn that from cowardice into heroism. asked for the big spending, which the president did and got. The president owned Congress the first 4 years he was in office, not the second 4, but the first 4. He got his way. They drank champagne in August of 1981 when he got his tax bill through at the White House. He pretty much got his way. There were enough Democrats who were scared of his popularity. That's exactly how it happened. But that notion that, well, we're going to grow our way out of this thing, we'll borrow the money, but we'll grow our way and pay for it, that kind of thinking is what's got us in trouble.
You know, I guess everybody has a different perspective on history. When we had the tax cuts in the early 80s under the Reagan administration, it stimulated economic growth, and we created 21 million new jobs during that period, that next 8-9 year period. And that was 21 million new taxpayers. So because of the tax cuts, we went from $500 billion in tax revenues to $1.1 trillion where we are today. We more than doubled the tax revenues. Now, one of the things where Andy and I differ in this debate right here is that Congress can only spend the money and Congress can only raise the taxes. And to start laying blame on anybody in the White House, whether it's a Democrat or Republican, is really not accurate, because the Constitution mandates that we appropriate the money and we raise the taxes. So to say that the White House got what they wanted and it was their problem, the fact of the matter is Congress is the one that makes these decisions. Okay. And the other fact is that the tax increases have more than doubled, so the problem is not that we don't have enough tax revenues, it's spending's out of control, and the big problem is well over 50% of the spending is in the entitlement area, and that's where we've got to get control. Defense has been coming down from about 26% of total spending to about 19%, so that isn't the problem any longer. It's in the area of entitlements and pork barrel.
Well, since this is a Channel 8 debate, let me point out to you some facts. The 1981 tax cut of Mr. Reagan's, mostly for upper-income people and specifically for war contractors. One war contractor paid nothing on $20 billion economic profit in 3 years after that. After that tax cut, the recession set in. The president himself lectured Wall Street, why aren't you investing? We've given you this big tax cut. The following year, the president signed into law the greatest tax increase in the history of the United States, including the one that Mr. Clinton's asking for now.
Okay, let's...
And that is... Well, it's true.
We're moving away from 1993.
And the economy took off.
This is an important debate we're having, but let's talk about 1993. If the vote were held today on the Clinton tax plan, economic plan, what would your votes be?
Well, I'll be voting against it, but the president has a full court press on. He's got a war room established in the executive office building. And the bottom line is I'm betting that he'll probably get what he wants.
Mr. Jacobs?
Well, the polls say that the 59% of the public support it, and I guess that's because all the tax cuts went to the high-income people in the 80s, and now they think there's going to be a little catch-up ball, even if they have to pay $12 more per family a month themselves. I think that most people see that as a turn toward fairness.
Let's talk about something we talked about before we began the program this morning, and that is the presidency itself and how it's changing. And really, it's a thankless job, regardless of whether you're a Republican or a Democrat. Right. What would you gentlemen see the future of the job being in ideal terms? If you could redefine what the president is and what he does and how long he's in office, what would you see?
Why don't you go first?
Well, first of all, I'd see a her. I think that's going to happen in the next 10 years or so. Certainly for a vice president, it's long overdue. But I believe that we've come to the point in this country where some woman wrote a book a few years ago and she used this phrase, instant gratification takes too long. And as a people, I think President Clinton slammed one home in his inaugural speech, which otherwise was pretty dull, when he used that one phrase that we must disenthrall ourselves from the notion that we can get something for nothing. Your parimutuel racing is a good example of that. It's permeating the society. Get something for nothing. I got it coming. The world owes me a living. And that's what people in this country more and more are led to believe by charlatans who are leaders in this country. Consequently, any president who has the courage to stand... Chesterton said it takes less courage to die for one's country than to tell her the truth. Any president who does that, man or woman, is going to lose the next election. And I think we were talking just before the program. I think I've been finally persuaded that the 1 6-year term for president makes a lot of sense, or we're going to gobble this democracy down to nothing in the next 10 or 20 years, and our children are not going to know what we've known.
1 6-year term.
Way to do it.
Well, of course, like I said before, the responsibility for taxes and spending rests with the Congress, and there needs to be some changes in the way we do business there. But I think Andy's absolutely correct. The president, in this current environment in which we live, is in such a very difficult situation that it's my opinion that he should run for that office with an agenda to get the economy moving and keeping the country moving in the right direction, and not plan on a second term. And if he were to do that and announce that in his inaugural speech, I'm not planning on a second term, I'm going to do what's right for the country, I think he'd get plaudits, number one. He might get reelected if he chose to run. But more importantly, I think that he would be freed up to do the things that he thinks is important to help the future of the United States.
Gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us today on Top Story. Congressman Andy Jacobs, Congressman Dan Burton. It's been a joy.
Yes, sir.
In a moment on Top Story, parimutuel racing is on its way to Central Indiana. We'll talk about that coming up.
They all seem to do the job.
One's better, but the others are fine.
Most days anyone will do.
It's not important. It doesn't matter what you choose.
It does matter.
You bet.
Some people watch whichever newscast comes up instead of changing the channel. But when the story is important, they turn to the best. Why should you ever settle for less? 24-hour News 8 on today's Wish TV. The best news you'll get all day.
How secure is your insurance company? That's an important question today. This is Dennis James, and I'm proud to tell you Physicians Mutual Insurance Company has been a solid company for over 90 years now. In recognition of its financial stability and sound operating performance, Physicians Mutual has been rated A+ superior by AM Best Independent Insurance Analysts. So remember, you can feel secure with Physicians Mutual.
We're here when you need us, Physicians Mutual.
The months of speculation are over. The Indiana Horse Racing Commission selects a site for the state's first parimutuel racing track. Rick Dawson reports on the decision that kept two communities on edge.
A lot of people are hoping the first track would be in Anderson on this site in Madison County.
It'd be good for all the businesses because they're going to stop and get gas, they're going to stop and get eats, buy things. It's going to help us a lot.
I don't think the people that don't want it realize what it can do for this town and the surrounding community. There's a lot of jobs in the racehorse business.
Others were hoping those jobs end up at this site in Shelby County, where Sagamore Park is proposed.
I'd go. I'll spend my money, try to win some money on some horses.
But the Sagamore Group wanted an exclusive permit allowing no other tracks within 75 miles. And the Indiana Horse Racing Commission had a problem with that. The Sagamore Park permit also hinged on the creation of 4 off-track wagering sites elsewhere in the state.
We are going to reject the application of Sagamore Park for the exclusivity and the requirement of the off-track betting parlors and accept the Anderson Park application.
We weren't going to ask for an exclusive license. We didn't think in Anderson, Indiana, we were entitled to ask for that. We didn't think they were entitled to ask for that in Shelbyville either.
Sagamore Park's developers say the state will lose out because Anderson Park's developers are based in Michigan.
We're disappointed. All the people on the commission are good people, but the bottom line is that Hoosiers got the shaft.
Anderson officials are ecstatic.
Our estimates at this point is approximately $40 million a year. From the standpoint of the track, the peripheral business, the ripple effect that it will create.
We're going to be racing in April next year. You can go to bank with that.
We had hoped to be joined this week by representatives of both the Anderson and Shelby County groups, but because we taped the show on Friday and because the snowstorm hit Thursday night, we're joined today by Bill Masterson. He is a racing industry expert and served as a consultant to the Sagamore Park Group, the losing entrant in this battle from Shelby County. First of all, your reaction to the decision that was made by the Horse Racing Commission.
Paul Estridge and the Indiana group that sponsored this project are quite shocked that Hoosiers have been frozen out of parimutuel wagering in Indiana, and that the state has chosen out-of-state interests from Ohio and Michigan and New York with no ties to Indiana to run the operation. So we're shocked that the state did that.
Now, Mr. Masterson, you are perceived nationwide as a racing industry expert. Is Indiana a ripe market for horse racing?
For the right racetrack, for the right scenario, with the right development of satellite facilities around the state, it is. But in my opinion, after 19 years in the industry, Anderson was not the site to be approved.
Do you foresee problems for them?
Well, I do. The state experts, which were hired by the State Racing Commission, determined that it was an inferior site. There were problems with the design and the construction, traffic problems,
And if the developer that's building it is going to build it non-union in the union town of Anderson, and when you look at the other tracks he built in Michigan, Hoosiers will hang their head in embarrassment when they see what they get. So I think that potentially it'll be a real problem in getting public support.
And again, we want to stress that the folks from Anderson were asked to come here today, and we can't blame them. The weather is terrible outside. But Mr. Masterson, what is the next step for your group? Obviously, there is the option that there might be another horse track added someday. I imagine. Are you going to continue your fight?
I think at this time we're exploring our options legally to see which actions we may want to take, administrative or legally, to protect our interests. Mr. Estridge has almost $2 million involved in this project in the last 3.5 years. So we need to examine the record and see what we want to do legally before we take a look at other racetracks in this state.
There's the whole issue, too, of the financing, which became problematic toward the end. Was that a factor, you think, in the decision?
Well, the commission awarded a license, a permit, to a group that has no financing. There's no financial commitment on the part of Anderson, whereas with Indiana National Bank and other local banks, our group, Sagamore, presented a financing plan, whereas Anderson had no plan, no bank, no local people involved in it at all. So I think that it could present a problem if they can't get their financing together.
When do you see, you're talking about a future that could be filled with problems for this Anderson facility. When do you see these problems beginning to come to a head? Obviously, right now we're in the afterglow of the decision, and they're celebrating up there.
Right. Oh, I think the problems will be immediate because the State Racing Commission will adopt its order have it prepared on March 10th, in the last week of March. We'll seek to sign that order. So I think you'll see some activity before that time.
Bill Masterson from the Sagamore Park Group, thank you very much for joining us this morning.
Very welcome.
Story. We'll be right back.
I started when I was 13, car theft, credit card fraud, shoplifting.
And I know a couple girls that tried to kill somebody.
And stabbing in the head with the knife.
There's girls that are out there slinging drugs.
They're getting younger, they're getting more violent, and they're female. A closer look at this disturbing trend, Monday at 6 on 24-Hour News 8.
The top news team in the state, experienced, committed, familiar, and devoted to Central Indiana. Mike Ahern and Debbie Knox are there for you, only on Wish TV.
Do you suffer from headaches, back, neck, or shoulder pain? Take a step toward better health. Chiropractic care could be the answer. I'm Dr. Maddox. With over 6 years of chiropractic school and 11 years in practice, I know when I can help. At Maddox Chiropractic, we use the latest equipment and trained therapists to help speed up your recovery. When you have a problem, don't wait. Most insurances are accepted, so call today.
Call today for a free spinal exam.
Another top story in the week just ending, the heavy snow that began falling Thursday. We leave you with a look at what we received and what we're still dealing with. That's top story for this week. I'm Ken Owen. Have a great day.